most people are going to accept the mark of the beast, right? That's kind of a matter of fact, right? And that's because most people are operating on a presupposition that God doesn't exist, and that are operating in a nihilistic mindset subconsciously, whether or not they express religiosity or not. Like, they may say, I'm a Christian and I believe in God and whatever, but then their actions and their thoughts and their way of life indicates otherwise, right? So it comes down to a choice. And if you want to believe that God does exist, you have to choose to act in a way that makes that true. All right. Welcome to the Body Aesthetic. My name is Matthew, and today we have our first guest of the channel, Mr. Daniel. Today we're going to be talking about the N word, not the one you're thinking of. There you go. Perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah. I read this quite a while ago, and I listened to the audiobook again. For those who don't know, Nihilism by Eugene Rose, Father Seraphim. I wanted to reread it before our talk, but I didn't have time to. I do want to open it up to kind of one quote that we can kind of kick off our discussion on nihilism,
Yeah.
and how it relates to our current culture and media and art and the things that we discussed earlier this week, right?
Sure.
So what Father Seraphim says here, I found very fascinating. So he says, nihilism has become in our time so widespread and pervasive, has entered so thoroughly and so deeply into the minds and hearts of all men living today, that there is no longer any front on which it may be fought. And those who think they are fighting it are most often using its own weapons, which they in effect turn against themselves. So in our discussion of nihilism in modern culture, the things that create culture, so like art, media, movies, in our day and age, video games, are culture creators now, they're being created by people who are raised and groomed in a time where nihilism is so pervasive that it's literally dominated the hearts and minds of pretty much all Western men. And when we had a discussion earlier this week, I remember you mentioned art as an indicator species of culture, which I really like that comparison. So, and indicator species in terms of biology. So if a biologist is studying an ecosystem, an indicator species would be a species, whether it's thriving or not, gives an indication of how healthy that ecosystem is, right? So why don't you go ahead, Daniel, expand on that idea, and then we can go into nihilism and its pervasiveness in the modern cultural mind.
Well, I mean, you explained the concept of the indicator species well. It's a benchmark within biology and ecology for the health of, a given environmental system. My thought about it when we talked was that, I mean, we in a Christian sense are the focal point of creation, and our labors and our activities they're outgrowths of I also used the word earlier in the week, the incarnational aspects of our lives. I tied that to a different concept earlier in the week, but our buildings, our roads, the baskets we weave, the songs we write and sing, and all of the other products of human labor are outgrowths of our incarnated, created existence as children of the one true God. And specifically, those endeavors that humankind pursues that are creative, when we paint or we write songs, we write poems, we tell stories, those are, they're like a campfire with, the little embers that are constantly flickering, away from the base of the fire. And in my mind, they are the poker tell, they are the indicator species of what we believe in a given moment, what we think, the philosophies and ideas that undergird us and that are manifesting themselves in our societies, and through which we're working through the problems and issues that confront us. I think that it probably goes without saying, and certainly to anybody that would watch this and would have an interest in what we're discussing, I think by certainly any Christian measure, the fruits of our creative labors at the present time bear witness to an intense hollowness that resides within all of Western man. We are fundamentally empty, and our societies are emptied out. We've been hollowed out by, some time, and we'll talk about that, but some period of time that we're still living through, you and I and others. and a process that's been unfolding now for quite a while. And where it's brought us to in the current moment is that everyone around us, and I would say even ourselves, whether we want to admit it or not, even in the things that we hold most dear or that we think are conversely not meaningless but meaningful, are touched with an aspect of nothingness, of emptiness, and of desolation. And in the run up to this, I was thinking about the liturgy of my church, the Roman Catholic Church. And I was thinking of the current, what Pope Benedict XVI, the ordinary form of the Roman Rite, what most people in the popular vernacular call the Novus Ordo Mass, what is formerly known as the Mass of Paul VI, or Pope Saint Paul VI, who was the Pope that presided over the conclusion of the Second Vatican Council in the 1960s. And in the run up to this, I was thinking about, I attended one of these masses last weekend at my local church. We were busy with some home projects, and we didn't have time to make it down to our normal parish, the parish by which we are members, which is about 15 minutes away from us, which does perform the same liturgy, but which does it in a style, it really performs it correctly according to the rubrics of the Roman Rite, which means that it looks a lot like the traditional Latin Mass.
Mm-hmm.
The table altar has been removed. The altar faces the back wall. The priest faces the altar ad orientem, not ad populum, or towards the people. So we attended one of the rites or a mass near our house, and I was thinking about this evening and thinking about the emptiness that was conveyed into the most sacred part of the Roman Rite, what has been called the source. I mean, it is the liturgy around the Eucharistic rite. It has been described as the source and the summit of the Christian life, the Eucharist. And I was thinking about how many people, when they attend a Roman Catholic church in the ordinary rite, in the rites that were given to us by the Second Vatican Council, not entirely correctly, how denuded and stripped down they are relative to the Missal of 1962, which is the formal name for what we popularly call the traditional Latin Mass.
Yeah, which then leads to popes, going down a slide in carnival in the middle of a church.
Yes, and that is exactly the point, is that when that process unfolded, centuries of meaning, of richness, of expression, of depth were stripped away in an instant. And what was left behind were walls that were denuded, altars that were stripped, high altars that were made of marble that were broken away from the wall of the church and destroyed, were replaced with wooden tables, probably in some cases things more profane than that, maybe a card table, maybe a folding card table. So in this process, I think you alluded to this a moment ago, even the things, Western man is afflicted by the symptom of nihilism, or perhaps the disease of nihilism, even in the places where you would least expect to find it, in the Roman Rite. Since the 1960s, I don't have the exact statistics, but, look around the Western world until the COVID experience, which was a spiritual awakening for Western man in many ways. There had been a long, sad decline of attendance in Catholic churches, in the number of baptisms performed annually, in the number of converts, in the number of people walking away. And why? What were they leaving? They, in many cases, were leaving nothing. They were leaving poor homiletics. They were leaving a priest who said nothing while droning on for hours. They were leaving terrible liturgy that left them wanting, liturgy that they could have found, a simple walk through a beautiful shaded wood would leave you more spiritually enriched than what they were leaving behind in their Catholic church. And so the point that I'm getting at is that even in those spaces we hold most dear, Western man is beset from all directions with nihilism.
Definitely. And to that point, also what Father Seraphim says, just the extreme pervasiveness of it. It's so pervasive that it's the default mode of thinking, right? It's even when you grow up and go to public school and you're learning things in school, it's like everything is kind of presupposed by nihilism. Like everything you learn, the ideas that are taught to you and like, in terms of like evolution, biological evolution and things of that nature, it's all predicated on this, idea that nothing really matters and we're just kind of hunks of meat on a rock floating in space.
Well, what's the C.S. Lewis quote? The C.S. Lewis quote, and I don't have it off the top of my head, and I certainly can't paraphrase it, but about something to the effect of man becoming a technique. for reasons we can dive into a little bit later or now, or and certainly thinking about the moment that we live in 2026 with technology, for better or worse, or whatever anybody else thinks about it and its potential or its current capabilities or anything like that. When people hear the words artificial intelligence right now, and I speak from personal experience, what is it for those of us that fear the idea? And I would say that I fear the reality less than I fear the idea, certainly as expounded by Silicon Valley. What is it that stirs the fear in me? And I think it is, at its deepest element, it is the fear of being treated as a component.
Mm-hmm.
I think that personally, that scares the daylights out of me and speaks to the greater danger of such an idea if it were possible. That's another matter. I have my skepticisms about that, certainly as a Christian.
Yeah. Well, so what I would say about that, sorry to interrupt you, but
No, no.
I just have a thought because, and this goes back to my high school US history teacher. He said something to me that was a 4-word sentence that has stuck with me my entire life. I don't think he even realized how much of a profound effect it had on me, but he told me belief is a choice. And that always kind of lived rent free in my head because I tried to understand what he meant by that. What I gathered is that we will never have total, irrefutable, evidential truth of anything, really, like whether God exists or not, and or any other truth, sub-truth that comes out of those two. Because that's really the one truth that underlies every other truth, is whether God exists or not. And so the belief in God, or the believing in no God, is a choice to be made by an individual person. So as a pragmatic thinker, like I told you before, I think of ideas in terms of how what's their value to me. Like, the value of an idea is how applicable and practical it is to me. And so I have these two options. I can choose to believe that God doesn't exist, which means that I believe in a world that has no inherent meaning. There is no true purpose. We are just descendants from apes, and we are just the next step of evolution. And we are just kind of meandering, blindly in the dark, trying to achieve heaven, godhood, and utopia through the brute force of technology.
Yeah.
Or I can choose to believe that God does exist, which means that all of creation finds its source in love, in goodness, and everything that belief stems from, so that human life is sacred and has value, and humans are a hypostatic person, so they're union of body and soul, so they're more than just a bag of mostly water, flesh popsicle,
Yes.
or whatever, meat popsicle. And so choosing to believe in that God exists is the presupposition of every other belief, and how you respond to things like, hey, Elon Musk wants to put a chip in your brain to, whatever, enhance your thinking, cure Alzheimer's, whatever the advertisement is, for the day. And you see that most people are choosing, like, most people are going to accept the mark of the beast, right? That's kind of a matter of fact, right? And that's because most people are operating on a presupposition that God doesn't exist, and that are operating in a nihilistic mindset subconsciously, whether or not they express religiosity or not. Like, they may say, I'm a Christian and I believe in God and whatever, but then their actions and their thoughts and their way of life indicates otherwise, right? So it comes down to a choice. And if you want to believe that God does exist, you have to choose to act in a way that makes that true, right? So that means that I respect my fellow man because I see the image of God in them, and I act charitably because, again, there's image of God in my fellow man, and it's my duty as a Christian to give alms, and to help and to uplift and to spread the gospel and the good word, and all those things. So
Well, and you, as an Eastern Christian, you are in a tradition, while I am as well, where particularly in the iconography of Christ, it is the image of Christ. I think we are called to meditate on, because he himself is the icon of ourselves. That's what there are so many things that make the Christian faith so different and so radical compared to any other faith tradition in this world. But in part because the fullness of the Godhead came down, was born of a virgin, was a boy who grew into manhood, and whose face was like our faces. And in that face, then, the divine nature of Christ, he has dual natures, both fully man, fully God, but also the little piece of divinity within ourselves, meaning the fact that we were made in the image and likeness of God, that what Catholics call the preternatural state that we had before the fall, that we have a little glimmer of in our lives, in ourselves, not in our lives, but in ourselves. Our created nature is a little piece, a little glimmer of the preternatural state that we existed in before the garden. And the Godhead reflects that back at us, thereby showing the dignity that we all possess. And I want to reflect on two things that you talked about, which was the fullness of the choice that we have as children of the one true God, and also the way in which a materialistic nihilism pervades all of our thinking. I'll start with the second and then move to the former. You said something about yourself, which was about finding value in the ideas that are most practical to you. Certainly not a criticism, but it strikes, and you may not have thought about it, or you may think about it, but it's utilitarian. And I believe you used that term about yourself the other day.
Yeah, it's my nature, so for better or for worse, right?
I'm not very much different. You and I both have technical backgrounds professionally. And I know that I lean on that a great deal in all things that I think, say, and do, and the outlook that I take on life. My profession, I very much am always hunting for a technical solution to a problem. So that is inherently utilitarian. So in both of our thinking, and it's in a very sublime way, it's very materialistic. We're looking for the gear that we connect to another gear that will spin the whirligig, that will produce the thing that we're seeking. We're looking for the machine to perform the task that we need. That, to me, it's a symptom of the larger disease. And even we as Christians, as small o Orthodox Christians, particularly, I'm a convert to my tradition of Christianity. I was raised in a Christian tradition, Protestant tradition, but the catechism or the catechesis was very sparse, almost to non-existent. It was very superficial. So I'm a man and a product of the late 20th century. I can't help but be that way. And so I think it's another example of how this malady afflicts us. The second thing that I was going to respond with your comments about choice. I was listening to about a 10-minute video earlier today on the Blessed Mother, the Theotokos. And I'll tell you, in Mass the other day, in the most recent Mass we attended at our parish church that we are members of, the Catholic priest was delivering his homily and used the term Theotokos to describe the Blessed Mother. So I say that to you, as a little piece of unity between our two traditions.
I see the olive branch.
No, absolutely, because it's something that Catholics, certainly the people of the parish that we belong to, those are people who are reading and are deeply engaged with their faith. It's a intentional parish. But thinking about that video on the Blessed Mother, Our Lady, and the comments that you made about choice throughout the Bible, but certainly in the dialogue between Gabriel and Mary that we find in the Gospel of Luke, one of the absolutely, I think, essential snippets that we need to take away from the dialogue between the archangel and the young virgin is that she's posed with a question that is also a challenge. And I think there's two fundamental things about that touch upon what you said and that also should give us heart. Give us heart as Christians, too, in the moment that we live in Western society, where along the lines of what we're talking about, everything feels so deterministic. Everything is preordained. Certainly, if you listen to the technologists of Silicon Valley, they are about to immanentize the eschaton.
Mm-hmm.
And it's going to happen. And there's nothing anybody can do about that. That touches upon what you said very starkly, because as you remarked upon how many people you think will accept the mark. That is essentially, it's both. For most people, they'll take it, they'll swallow this, they'll say, oh yeah, well, Sam Altman said, or Elon Musk said, or Mark Andreessen.
Immortality, sure.
But what we can take away from the dialogue between the archangel and the virgin is how, Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. And the Blessed Virgin says, and I'm paraphrasing, of course, whoa. She responds with a question. How can this be? This is what we would say to Sam Altman and the like. How can this be? She questions, and I'll tie it back to another piece in the Old Testament in a moment, but she questions. She does not just accept. This is the difference, a key fundamental difference between us and Islam. And I would say this is an inheritance from our Jewish friends, but certainly I think it takes on another dimension and aspect in Christian faith. But she's able to argue. She can argue. She can dissent. Ours is not an unquestioning faith. And then,
sorry, I just want to make one point of that, because
go ahead.
A Greek monastic told me, and this was very influential on me. As a young man, I was a teenager back then. He was like, you need to question everything that the church tells you. He said, because if the church doesn't have an answer for all your questions, it's not the truth. Right? So.
Yeah, no, that's right. Well, and we can take great heart and comfort in the fact that, once we make our way through the liar, lunatic, Lord trichotomy posed to us by C.S. Lewis, and those of us who are believers finally arrive at the place in which we say, yes, Lord, I believe. Eyes have not seen and ears have not heard, and yet I believe. But like the virgin, like Christ in the garden, like Abraham on the mountaintop, we say, not mine, but thy will be done. I started my first serious encounter with Roman Catholicism was in 2005. Shortly around the time that Pope St. John Paul II was about to go on to his eternal reward. And so I briefly attended some, what was then called RCIA classes, Rite of Christian Initiation for Adults classes in my hometown. And there was this cantankerous old Irish priest who was the parish priest of that church. His favorite thing to do when he ran out of mass, and I'm not even kidding, the first thing that he did was immediately walk out.
Smoke a cigarette?
Yes. He immediately lit a Marlboro light.
I knew it.
And it was awesome because when he was saying the mass, I mean, it was like something out of a film. He was a little short man. His name was Liam, Father Liam. And during the penitential rites in the early part of the liturgy, the beating of the breast and Lord have mercy. Christ have mercy. And it was with the Irish accent that was heavily inflected by years of cigarette smoking with the damaged vocal cords. But Father Liam in RCIA, we were talking about why we have free will. And he said, for love to be love, love cannot be forced. You do not have true love with compulsion. Therefore, we're given the choice to love God. We're given the option to reject him. Throughout Scripture, and this isn't him saying, this is me saying this, but throughout Scripture, then from the Old Testament through the New, we are shown the truth of our faith through a constant exposition of dialogue between humanity and God, and then the choice being ultimately left up to us. And as Mary could have said to the angel, certainly could have said, because the opening was there. I'm good. I don't know what you are, and I don't know what you're telling me, but I think I'm going to pass. She could have said that to him. The door was left open to her, and she said yes.
Yeah, it's an incredible point because, and this is also a point of my channel, The Body Aesthetic, is I want to kind of provide a means of discernment for particularly the young people to try to navigate like what's happening in the world, because now the world is just so political, it's unavoidable. And one of the things that I noticed during COVID that I was telling my godchildren was that fact is that, God operates with respect to free will because there's no love otherwise. You can't love someone and enslave them. That's not how love works, right? It's the devil that seeks to enslave, right? He wants to control you with sin. So tyranny is of the devil. And during COVID, when you had governments that were cracking down on shutting churches down and preventing masses and liturgies and clamping down on freedom of speech and freedom of worship and just kind of going down that totalitarian spirit, let's say, um, that to me was a indication of a satanic spirit, because that's tyranny is of Satan, right? God doesn't do that to us.
Yeah.
And so anything that kind of clamps down on your free will and your freedom to choose is a satanic spirit.
Yes.
And conversely, anything that gives you the freedom to choose whether good or bad, that's a godly spirit.
Yes.
So that's what's so amazing about our faith and about scripture, about the Bible, is that it's literally like a rubric for reality. It's like, here's
Yes.
how reality works. And if you understand the scripture, you can apply that to what's happening in any day and age, because obviously history is cyclical. We repeat the same patterns over and over. And the Bible, as a metaphysical text, is showing you the pattern of
Yes.
humanity, right? The human condition.
Yeah.
And so we can use it to discern what is the right path, what is the right choice when we're presented with a choice, because the world is going to tell you, nihilism is going to tell you that there is no right choice. It's all relative, right? So
Well, and
actually, it doesn't
as I,
matter.
as I said the other day, the French philosopher Sartre, all of life is meaningless. His inevitable or I guess the inevitable conclusion of his philosophical journey through the exploration of life without God and its implications, that was the concluding point that he came to.
It's absurd.
All of life is meaningless.
Yeah.
Do whatever you will, to the point that you just made a moment ago. Where else have we heard that?
Yeah. Do as thou wilt.
Do as thou wilt. And the Bible, as you, I think, really well said, is the rubric of our faith, the genetics of our faith, or the DNA of our faith, I guess you could put it like that. What do we see? What do we see in our world, kind of tying back to the start of the conversation? What do we see when do thou what's thy will? What do we see when that is carried out in practice? And I say
Chaos.
that as a rhetorical point, and then in practical terms, what did we see in the Soviet Union?
Death.
What did we see in Mao's China? What do we see? What do we see in a fashionable New York art gallery? You know, it's rhetorical, but it's real. We can point to real things, right?
That's the choice being made, right? So they chose to believe that there's no value in this life, and that there is no God, and so
Right.
everything is permissible.
Joseph Stalin said, a few deaths is a tragedy. A few million deaths is a
Statistic.
statistic. I don't think we need to look any further than that. And yet, it's everywhere around us. It's shaping the world around us. It's shaping very serious people who are deciding in material terms, perhaps for a time, our fates, you and I, and those we hold most dear, and everyone else around us. And that raises to me existential questions about what those of us who don't share that outlook, certainly the choice that we have to make, but in underneath the macro choice, the micro choices then that should be informing how we carefully move around our day. Because I think if we're to act upon our free will, that is for those of us that are, that are ordinary people, those are the tools that we have best at our disposal to both to choose and then to
Hmm.
resist the forces of the demonic, because they are real. And that's ultimately what's guiding it all.
Right. And back to the relation to art and culture and media, like what we discussed about Game of Thrones and Breaking Bad, that demonic spirit is informing all these pieces of media, all these creative outlets, because the people that are creating them, again, the default mode is nihilism, right? It's
Right.
demonic method of thinking and way to view the world. So
Yes.
by extension, their creation is imbued with that.
Yes.
And so us consuming that content, like we discussed, it has a non-zero impact on us.
Yeah.
Not just spiritually, but even biologically. Like you said, you're having dreams about Breaking Bad, and it actually affects our nervous system. Like it embeds, like when you talk about like the anxiety you feel, like, and how I felt when I binge watched Game of Thrones. Because just to repeat, I got into it at like season 4, and so I was binge watching it to catch up. And like 4 days of watching 1 or 2 episodes a day, I could literally feel like a weight, like a physical weight on top of me, even though I like mentally I wasn't depressed. I was in a great state of mind, but I could feel like this depressive spirit over me. And I like, that's when I was like, this show is evil. Like
Yeah.
it's having an impact on me. And so there's actually a responsibility for us, not just as Christians. I think everyone has this responsibility, but we don't really recognize it, is that we have to be mindful of what we consume in our brain, which then gets distilled into our heart,
Yeah.
right? So that means that the content we consume, the movies we watch, the video games we play, the books we read, obviously there's a lot to be said about like um, fighting back in the, like you said, it's actual war, right? It's a war for the
Yeah.
soul of man. Fighting back in a way that we as Christians can create art, in opposition to the nihilist art, which makes me go down the path, because I wanted to talk about like how can a uh, worldview of meaninglessness produce meaning, right? It can't. So inevitably, the media, the TV, the movies we watch that are predicated by nihilism, they kind of just boil down to entertainment, right?
Mhm. Yes.
There may be drama, there may be interesting ideas, and may captivate you for a time, but at the end of it, you're left with no lesson. You didn't learn anything. You didn't grow in any way. All you just got was this depressive spirit over you,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Well, meaningless. Yeah. Meaninglessness because of, for the reasons we've talked about, because of its fundamental spiritual roots in Satanism. Thinking about the analogy of, is the darkness a thing unto itself, uh, ex nihilo, out of nothing, or is it something else? And the philosopher would say, well, it's the absence of light. Darkness can't generate itself. It is the absence of light. You turn the light off and now you have darkness. That's the only way it's produced. Certainly the devil, his power, because he's fundamentally not what he aspires to be. He does not possess the creative power of God. And so he and all of his works and the works of his minions have nothing, they have nothing creative to offer. Kind of tying back to the question that you just raised, can meaningless produce art? Can meaningless produce anything? Creativity and create and the word creation are, they're rooted in the Latin word creato or creatio. And I only am thinking about that word because of another passage I read in Father Seraphim's book, yeah, in the run up to this. But, they've all got the same source. Evil and then its offspring, meaningless and nihilism, darkness, they they do not create themselves. They have no creative energy. Only an outside source of energy can create anything in the space in which they occupy.
Well, you just made me make an interesting connection, because absolute truth can exist on its own, whereas
Yes.
relative truth cannot.
Yes.
So just like you're saying, darkness can't exist unless it has some kind of relation to light.
Yes.
It's showing you like within itself, like within the very concepts itself, that relative truth is darkness,
Yes.
right? So
It's the void. It is the void. It possesses no other characteristics or qualities. It has nothing to offer. You reminded me of one of the pivotal actors in the conversion of my spouse and I to Catholicism. It was the popular YouTube evangelist Bishop Robert Barron. And probably the pivotal thing that he said to me, or not to me, it spoke to me, certainly. It did talk to me, and and it was pivotal, was years ago when we lived in Nebraska and we were on that journey watching one of his Word on Fire videos, and he was criticizing the new atheists and criticizing part of the a big part of the problem with their arguments against God, which was, as he said, to paraphrase, the problem with them is that God is this big fat guy with a big white beard residing on a cloud somewhere up in the sky. And then he steps back and he steps back to Thomas Aquinas, the medieval scholastic Catholic philosopher. And he then references Aquinas's writings or definition of God as not a thing in the universe, not a thing in the world, not a created being, but the very act of being itself. And I remember when I heard that, I'd never heard that in my life. And I heard those words, the very act of being itself. And it hit me like a sledgehammer between the eyes. That was years ago. That was now nearly 13 years ago this Easter. I've never stopped reflecting on those words. God is the very act of being itself. God is the only thing that is, both as a noun and a verb, outside of all creation. Not a thing in creation, not a created being. We don't have to revisit the first ecumenical council and the Arian concepts of the created Superman that he believed Christ was. God is outside of all things, is in all things, is outside of time and space. He is. And the only thing, and that I'll conclude the point that I'm trying to get to, is the only thing, the only true in the verb tense of the word true thing that is not created, but that possesses the power of creation. The only thing, nothing else. So whenever, and kind of drilling down into the moment that we live in and the moment that we're children of, that we're successors of, because sadly, we're riding on the coattails of our forebears who were antecedents in the process that we're living through. We're beset by a culture that has been stripped, as I said the other day, within the span of about 6 decades of a situation in which, from presidents to railroad workers to pastors to civil rights leaders to everybody in between, there was a common framework and a sense of that truth and the sort of the metaphysical dynamics that we're talking about. And that undergirded everything. That undergirded literature. It undergirded art. It undergirded, thinking about Dwight Eisenhower's reflections on Robert E. Lee, which has been the subject of some, cultural chatter in the last few years because of Confederate statues and things like that. Well, part of the graciousness and magnanimity that both Northern leaders felt at the time towards defeated Southern leaders like Robert E. Lee, and then fast forwarding 90 to 100 years later to somebody like Dwight D. Eisenhower and his reflections on the figure of Robert E. Lee. The grace to see a man involved with the sort of things that Lee was in the Confederate South at that time, that some members of our society now hold as so abhorrent. The ability to see the qualities of a person, to both look upon him with magnanimity and defeat, and then to say that he was a good man. Yeah, he probably held slaves and lived among slaves and among slaveholders, but he was still a good man. The man was a decent man. He honored his wife. He honored his family. He upheld his obligations. He paid his debts. There were things about the man that were good. And the point that I'm getting at with that is that that was only 60 years ago that a major leader, a major American leader, both a president and a four-star general in World War II, um, looked back upon a supposed villain now with nothing but complete Christian grace. I assume that Eisenhower was probably a Protestant. That's not important. He was a thoroughly enculturated Christian man. Well, and fast forward to today. I mean, I don't know that it's fair to say that all of that's been lost. Certainly not. You and I are here and others like us, but certainly in the upper echelons of power in our societies and in thought leaders, the TED Talk sort, it's nowhere to be found. It's nowhere to be found. And uh, the effects of it, as you said about, the shows that you mentioned, they're absolutely everywhere. They're everywhere. And then, as you also rightly said, they afflict us. We feel the darkness in our bones. They bring us to a dark precipice with their very presence. And I guess I would ask you, I don't want to go on any longer, but I would ask you then to take what you were talking about, and I'll ask you, what do we do about it? What do we do about it? And because I think you wanted to touch on that with this discussion is in terms of art and culture. And I think there are real things to think about with art. What do we do? What do we create? Right? What do we create that's meaningful? Because I don't think it can be sappy, sticky, popular Christian products. Not all of which are bad, but much of which leave a lot to desire. What can both have gravity and meaning?
Well, C.S. Lewis had a quote where he basically said, don't ever concern yourself with being original. All you need to do is tell the truth, and you'll always be original.
Yeah.
And I think what we do about it, whether we're creative people or not, whether we produce creative works or not, is back to that choice that I mentioned before. We choose to believe in God. And that's a constant choice. That's an everyday choice. That's an every second choice. Right? Because again, to choose to believe in God means that I'm going to choose to act in a way, think in a way, do in a way that God does exist. And, sometimes we don't. Every time we sin, we basically are acting in a way that God doesn't exist.
Yes.
Because how could you not fear, the ultimate source of everything with, like, if he were to just reveal like 0.00001% of his grace and light to us, we would be eviscerated,
Yes.
right? And
Yes.
so for us to just like nonchalantly sin, that's us operating in a way, choosing to operate in a way that we don't, that God doesn't exist. So I think it all comes down to that. And by doing that, we're integrating meaning into our lives in every aspect of it. And that's where the battlefield is happening. It's happening in the metaphysics, in the spiritual world, where when we act in this way, we're introducing more and more meaning against the tides of meaninglessness, against the void, right? And I think that's really the only solution, because, like when you said, the nihilism is the void, and the void cannot produce, it cannot create, it can only really destroy, right? It sucks in and destroys. The other side of that is that meaning is like the image that you gave before of like a campfire. Like God is the main fire, and we're
Yes.
the little flickers that and the embers that come off of that fire.
Yes.
And so He is the source of all meaning, and that's why when we choose to believe in Him and act in that way, we're adhering ourselves to the source of all meaning, and so that meaning is then infused in every aspect of our lives, whether or not we're producing creative works. But even just having this discussion, we're introducing meaning into the world in some measure. Right. So
Yes.
that's the solution. I would love to, I have a desire to be creative, but like I'm not we're technical people, right? I'm a
Yes.
technical person, and that doesn't mean I don't have a capacity to be creative, but it's like I've spent all my energy and all my points down the technical path.
Yeah.
Um, and it would be cool someday to be involved in producing content, or I don't want to say content because content sounds like pure entertainment, but producing art in like the way of Tolkien, which is um, not like what you're kind of mentioning, the like popular mainstream Christian approach,
Yes.
where it's just like Father God, yeah,
Yeah.
hands in the air, God is not dead, it comes off really cheesy, right?
Yes.
But when you have products like the Lord of the Rings, where there is no church in Lord of the Rings, there's no religion, there's no talk of God or even gods, really, even though they do exist in the in the lore, but the meaning is infused in the very story
Yes.
because it is a story of hope. It's a story of mercy because the ring is ultimately destroyed because Bilbo had a moment of mercy and spared Gollum.
Yes.
And a lot of people forget that Frodo didn't destroy the ring. He actually gave in to temptation at the very end. And it was Gollum who attacked him trying to vie for the ring that ultimately the ring fell into the fire. And that wouldn't have happened if Bilbo that many years ago didn't spare Gollum as an act of mercy. So you see how like these concepts, these good and beautiful and Christian concepts are ingrained in the very story itself, but not explicitly outwardly like, self-righteous in
Well,
its expression.
and something we explored the other day that I didn't really explore because I was thinking about this conversation. When you talked about the Lord of the Rings, something I was thinking about as we were talking the other day was on on Hobbiton as a model of the good, the true, and the beautiful. And what do you have with Hobbiton? You've got a little village made of simple building materials, wood and earth and sod. And what are the activities that the hobbits in Hobbiton concern themselves with? Um, they grow things. They
Hmm.
grow vegetables. That's as, as Bilbo says at the top of the Fellowship of the Ring, probably the book, I don't remember it. It's been a long time. But the movie adaptation is, they love nothing more than to dig in good, rich earth.
Hmm.
They have enormous families and they spend all of their time around one another. They enjoy festivals and beer and
Smoking pipe weed.
smoking the pipeweed and sleeping, taking an afternoon nap in the summer against a shady tree. That is the quintessential model of meaning in that story, I think, on the subject of meaning that Tolkien is trying to convey. I don't know that he was or not. That's my interpretation. I've never read anything both positive or negative about that. But when I think about that, it presents this little world where even the simplest and humblest of activities have deep meaning.
Hmm.
Digging in good, rich, dark earth is a meaningful thing.
Hmm.
And thinking about my own professional life, I alluded to this the other day. I've bounced around a lot, professionally speaking, from role to role. Part of it, and the feeling definitely welled up and grew stronger, that I couldn't just do anything. It had to mean something.
Hmm.
And the last two professional positions I've had, I think I've been very blessed by God to have, because they have allowed me. You were mentioning creative works, how you would like to pursue creative works, and if you have the time, and I think about that as well. And I think about how I can best be spending my life. But the thing that strikes me in this conversation is a reflection upon what I do. And the thing about it that I enjoy the most is that it has meaning in a little way. I could work there 25 years and retire and no one would remember me, but that's not important. That the work I did meant something, truly, that it had an element of truth in it.
Hmm.
And the truth that I'm speaking about specifically is that all things have value. The city has value and the people within it have value. Farms have value and the people who work those farms have value, and their respective labors are all good. And that's, I think, a key thing that when I ask the question, what do we do about it? To me, that's one of the really good starting places, is to get to the place where the mundane, the stupid, the asinine, the boring, we stop defining them by those adjectives. And we take a step back and we say, I shouldn't be so cavalier about this. Cleaning my grill is a drag. It's messy and it's covered in fats and greases. It's gross. It's nasty. That's a completely arbitrary example that I picked. But guess what? I think when I clean that out, when I spray it and I clean it and I wash the pieces in the sink, I'm doing a good thing. I am the hobbit digging in the dark, rich earth, right?
Yeah.
It has meaning. My labor has meaning. My time has meaning. My intentions have meaning.
Mm.
And I think that's a good starting place for us to revolt. You know, our book here, right? The root of the revolution of the modern age. Well, our counter revolution, I think, is in seeing the meaning in all of the little things that we experience every day.
Definitely. I love that. I think that's actually a great place to stop. I appreciate you making the time to be on the channel, and appreciate your insight and your perspective as a fellow amateur student of the world and noticer of the things around us.
Yeah. Well, I've enjoyed it. I love conversations like this, and I really appreciate you and being gracious enough to give me just a chance to have this conversation with you, because it's deeply enjoyable and I think it means a lot in the moment we
Of
live
course.
in all times, but certainly in this moment.
Definitely. And it's such a pleasure to meet you, and God willing, we can do this again sometime.
That would be wonderful. Thank you, Matthew.
Awesome, Daniel.
Yeah. Have a
Well,
good evening.
you as well. And take care, everyone. Godspeed. See you next time.